Employment practices. Ethical issues may be associated with employment practices in other nations. When work conditions in a host nation are clearly inferior to those in a multinational's home nation, those of the home nation, those of the host nation, or something in between. What standards should be applied? While few would suggest that pay and work conditions should be the same across nations, how much divergence is acceptable? For example, while 12-hour workdays, extremely low pay, and a failure to protect workers against toxic chemicals may be common in some developing nations, does this mean that it is okay for a multinational to tolerate such working conditions in its subsidiaries there, or to condone it by using local subcontractors? For example, Nike found itself as the center of a storm of protests when new reports revealed that working conditions at many of its subcontractors were very poor.
Human rights.
Beyond employment issues, questions of human rights can arise in international business. Basic human rights still are not respected in many nations. Rights that we take for granted in developed nations, such as freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of accusation, freedom of movements, freedom from political repression, and so on, are by no means universally accepted. Example was South Africa during the days of white rule and apartheid, which did not end until 1994. The apartheid system denied basic political rights to the majority non-white population of South Africa, mandated segregation between whites and non-whites, reserved certain occupations exclusively for whites, and prohibited blacks from being placed in positions where they would manage whites.
Environmental pollution. Ethical issues arise when environmental regulations in host nations are inferior to those in the home nation. Many developed nations have substantial regulation governing the emission of pollutants, the dumping of toxic chemicals, the use of toxic materials in the workplace, and so on. Those regulations are often lacking from the operation of multinationals that would be allowed at home. For example, consider again the case of foreign oil companies in Nigeria. Apart from air pollution from the oil industry's emission and flares day and night producing poisonous gases that are silently and systematically wiping out vulnerable airborne biota and endangering the life of plants, game, and man himself. The implication is that pollution controls applied by foreign companies in Nigeria were much more lax than those in developed nations. Should multinationals feel free to pollute in a developing nations?
Corruption. Corruption can be described as the use of public office for private gain, or the use of official position, rank, or status by an office bearer for his own personal benefit. Because of culture, corruption is embedded in almost every society for a long time, and it appears even today regardless of the status of the nations. Developing nations or poor nations tend to have higher level of corruption rather than developed nations or wealthy nations. Typical corrupt behavior are bribery, extortions, fraud, nepotism, cronyism, and appropriations of public assets, property for private use. High levels of corrupt practices creates a bad perceptions of the host country. Corruption could distort a nation's development when the government only concentrates on projects that benefit themselves and not the public. Government procurement become expensive with the existence of the corruptions in the transaction. For the corporate sector, a firm needs to assume additional costs out of the investment value when the funds could be used for productive investment.
Multinational corporations have power that comes from their control over resources, their ability to move production from country to country. Although that power is constrained not only by laws and regulation, but also the discipline of the market and the competitive process, it is nevertheless substantial. Some moral philosophers argue that with power comes the social responsibility. For multinationals to give something back to the societies that enable them to prosper and grow. The concept of social responsibilities refers to the idea that business people should consider the social consequences of economic actions when making business decisions, and that there should be presumption in favor of decisions that have both good economic and social consequences.